Gen Z, which would be the younger than millennials. Shout out to all of our Gen Z listeners. They are the most likely by far of any generation currently alive to buy a luxury vehicle, which is kind of crazy. A luxury vehicle used to be like, oh, that old retired guy bought a luxury vehicle because he's got a bunch of money. Now it's the people who have been scrolling the Instagram and they say, I would like to have that, and I live in a culture that will let me make that bad decision.
Yeah, that's called materialism. And we've got a couple of great blog posts on the dangers of materialism, and that is the lust of the eyes. You see something and go, I want that, and again, I'm going to put off what that might mean to my life. I'll just put that out of mind because I just want the thing that looks good to me. It's very dangerous, and it's not only financially hazardous, it is spiritually hazardous.
Right.
Yes, indeed. We are going to be taking a deep dive into one of the least popular words around financial circles, that is debt. But as you're going to hear Mark describe, we're not only talking about the threat of debt, but the lingo word is leverage. We're going to be talking about the good that can come from debt as well. So that's today's topic.
And this is Abraham's Wallet. Join us weekly and create a culture in your family of multi-generational prosperity, spiritually, relationally, physically, intellectually, and financially. Run your home, your dough, like a biblical boss. We saw each other recently. Can we tell the good people about this?
Yeah, man. It was top 5 for sure basketball experiences of my life. We got to go see the University of North Texas Mean Green win the NIT championship because our friend is the former head coach, and so that was super fun. But we haven't talked since we said goodbye that time. Did you have any wild experiences in Vegas after we dropped you off at your Marriott Town Place Suites?
No, that was the thing I loved the most about my hotel. Matter of fact, I just gave him a review today, which was, what was the number one thing that you liked about your hotel? It was like, it did not feel like it was in Las Vegas at all. That was the best thing about that hotel. So no, nothing wild happened to me. I'll just tell the people for just for info's sake, because I think it's kind of interesting. You were on a spring break trip down in Old Saint, one of the saints down there
St.
in
George.
Utah. Yeah, that's the one. Not too far from Las Vegas, within driving distance of Las Vegas. I had a friend who owns an RV here in Cincinnati and was driving his RV home from Las Vegas, my friend Dan. And he sent out a text message to some buddies, anybody want to make this trip with me? And I said, well, if I can make it happen, I would enjoy that. So I was doing that. We got the news that our friend was having his basketball team go to the finals of the NIT, which is played for the first time ever this year in Las Vegas, Nevada. And
Nevada,
I was like, well, that's incredibly convenient to me. I had no plans to be in Las Vegas a week ago, but now I'm going to be there. And you were there. You were then driving distance. You brought a couple of brothers-in-law with you, brought your daughter, and we watched the game, had a great time. And then I drove back. I drove back in a 3-day period, 37 hours worth of driving.
Yeah. One thing I do feel like I should tell our listeners, the referee that night, I think he went home and announced that he would never be a part of a basketball game again because of some of the things you said to him in moments of silence in the arena. He did
well, the good and the bad thing about being in the NIT championship in Las Vegas, if your team hails from Denton, Texas, is that it's hard to get a huge fan base to make the trip for the tournament. So that's too bad for the team. The good thing about that is, for a fan like me, I get to yell my guts out, and most words that I say are going to be heard quite well on the court, including any criticism I had of the refs, and which I had quite a bit of criticism to throw towards the refs.
They did the worst job I've ever seen at a and I mostly watch 7th grade girls basketball games, so my bar is low, but they did a really bad job of officiating that game. Um, the only other thing that's interesting about that whole deal is that our friend Grant, the reason we say former coach is because he's moved on to be the head coach of the Texas Tech Red Raiders basketball
Whoa,
team. And
that's a big deal. We need some confetti or some what are these things called?
we need those little cowboy guys with their guns that the Texas Tech people do.
Oh yeah, we could put a little gif of
Yeah.
the. I love
Well,
that little Red Raider guy. Looks
I
like Yosemite Sam. I have to throw out one thing before we move on. I know we have a lot to get to today. I just want to say one thing, which is people have commented, those who watch our YouTube channel, the dozens of people that are tuning into that have noticed that our logo has changed, our branding has changed, the look of our YouTube videos has changed, and that's because we're getting official, and because wonderful people donate money to make this machine go, and we're trying to put that money to good use. And we have editors who are better at it than me that are kind of getting into the machine of doing our weekly rhythm. So things are going good.
it's exciting.
Including, I have to do a shout out to editor Jorge in Honduras, who's doing a bang up job working with us.
It's exciting. And if you are like most of you, an audio only listener, could I encourage you to go to YouTube and just
Yeah, why not?
watch the first minute and a half of one of our episodes there, starting with the one that is our financial advisors a waste of money, I think was the first one, and
Yeah.
you'll see this cool new intro, which features
we have a new intro.
features the music of Steven Manuel and a really fun photo montage of all sorts of people who've been on the podcast. And since you're there, I mean, you already came to the YouTube channel, you're there. Hit the subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything. We don't charge for
Yeah,
that.
that's right. Even if you're never going to watch it again, you might as well subscribe. What does it hurt you? Get over it.
Give us a little boost.
Yeah.
Speaking of Steven, we have experimented very briefly with something that the kids enjoy called shorts. They like these very short video clips, and I think they're for Instagrams and TikToks and YouTube. And we've been trying to make them. We've failed miserably in the past. We've had a few that got like 30 views, but I just logged into our YouTube channel and I noticed one of them has been viewed by like 1,800 people, which is more than we've ever had anything viewed on YouTube. We have a lot more people than that listen to our podcast, but we've never made video that anybody watched beyond kind of a couple hundred folks. So that was kind of exciting, yeah.
I know. I'm curious. We're about to go through a little training program on YouTube, trying to get good at it and less dumb. But how does that happen? We put up 2 shorts in a week. One of them, I believe, presently has like 30 views, and the other one is rushing towards 2,000. And I don't know if that means that some important person saw it and shared it. I don't know what that means, but I don't understand any of that stuff. So I don't know why we're talking about it, except to go, it's curious.
And if you haven't seen it, you're missing out on something
You've got to see that thing.
Going viral.
Yeah. That's right. Now,
Okay.
Now then, we have been, just so everybody knows, our rhythm is we're trying to space these out because we know that our conversation around the critical skills of money, we know that it's kind of heady stuff. We're trying to do the deepest dive we can on this stuff to give people really good tools to answer the question, what are the necessary skills, the crucial, nay, even the critical skills that you have to become a master of your finances if you want to run your dough like a biblical boss, and I think you do, then how do you do that? What are the skills that you need? So we're walking we're trying to go methodically, slow, and deep into these 7 skills that you have to have. And so our rhythm is we're doing one of those, we're taking a little break, give you a little fresh air. Then we're going back into that. Then we take a little moment out, take a little smoke break, and then we come back in. So we have covered the first skill, which is that you need to acquire money. That's a pretty good starting place, is get some money. Then we've talked about oversight. Do you know where all your money is? Do you just know what's happening with it? Do you know where it's going? And then we talked about if you've got some, then how do you multiply it? What do the scriptures say about multiplying that money? That's a pretty important skill. And now once you've got money, you know where it all is, and it's beginning to multiply. Now we get into this fourth skill, which is
leverage.
Okay, leverage. So we must learn how to leverage our money. What do you mean by that, Mark?
Yeah, so we tried to be pretty clever when we came up with the titles for the critical skills of money.
Oh, I'd say we've been pretty clever.
And
Pretty clever.
you told me, Mark, debt just doesn't sound very exciting. It sounds like every other financial podcast in the world. So we said there's 2 sides to the debt coin. There's the borrowing, which is what most financial podcasts out there are going to talk to you about, how to not borrow too much or how to borrow
Yeah.
smartly. But there's also the lending. And if you're going to be a mature Abrahamic stud with your money, we want you to be capable on both sides of that equation. We talked about when we started this thing, we talked about one of our motivations was that the only kind of popular voice when it comes to biblically responsible handling of money was Dave Ramsey. And
True.
we're going to talk a little bit about Dave Ramsey in this podcast, but
Okay.
I would say he's excellent on this topic for certain people, and he's absolutely terrible on this topic
Ooh,
for other people. So,
spicy take.
yeah, we're gonna both praise Dave Ramsey, and we're gonna tell you where he acts like an absolute jackwagon in the
Okay,
course
if
of
you
this.
need to take him out at the knees, I'll hand you the club. Let's see how it goes.
But we want you to know how to handle debt, and before we can do that, before we can just jump into practical tips on debt, whether you're borrowing or lending, I think we need to address the biblical elephant in the room. What do you say?
Okay.
Exodus 22:25 says, "If you lend money to any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be like a money lender to him, and you shall not exact interest from him." Interesting thought. There's a prohibition there that sounds like it's saying no interest. Ezekiel 18:5 says, "If a man is righteous and does what is just and right, if he does not eat upon the mountains or lift up his eyes to the idols of the house of Israel, does not defile his neighbor's wife or approach a woman in her time of menstrual impurity, does not
Oh,
yeah, we can just skip right over that. That's fine. Does not oppress anyone, but restores to the debtor his pledge, commits no robbery, gives his bread to the hungry, and covers the naked with a garment, does not lend at interest or take any profit." And it goes on with this list, but there we go again. Does not lend at interest or take any profit. That doesn't sound right. Psalm 15 is describing a righteous man who does not let out his money at interest. Deuteronomy 23 and 24 are full of commandments around the topic of interest and loans. You shall not charge interest on loans to another Israelite, interest on money, interest on provisions, interest on anything that is lent. On loans to a foreigner, you may charge interest, but on loans to another Israelite, you may not charge interest, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all your undertakings in the land that you are about to enter and possess. So
you are working our way into the question of whether it is immoral simply to engage in the lending or borrowing of money with an interest attached to it at all.
we have to deal with it because there's some pretty clear instructions in the scripture, and some of the ways I hear people get around these, frankly, are unsatisfactory, which is just the old, well, that's just the Old Testament, and we're not supposed to worry about that anymore. Poo,
I hate that argument about
poo on that
pretty
argument.
much everything.
but but I also think there's some nuance here that spoiler alert, I participate in the American banking system, and
Oh,
so I think we should just deal with these scriptures before we try to tell people how to deal with debt wisely. We should make sure that they understand how to interpret this stuff that pretty clearly talks about debt. I think the question is, are we even allowed to borrow or lend? And there's these conflicting views in the scripture. One time it sounds like, yeah, you can lend and you can even lend at interest, but don't do it to an Israelite. There's other points where the righteous man is described as someone who does not lend at interest or does not let his money out at interest. That happens multiple times, that we're told that's a marker of righteousness. And then in Deuteronomy 23 and 24, the lending is kind of described as like there's something about to the poor. There's different terms to the foreigner, like I said, but also to the poor, you're supposed to lend differently. And in some cases, you must even be willing to lend when a loss is likely, simply because your neighbor's need is so great. That comes from Deuteronomy 15, 7 and 8. So what I would say is that there's a principle here that is that sometimes confused, and what I read into these is that generosity is sometimes confused with law around lending. The law for Israel was set up to say there's times when you're actually supposed to take care of people that are in your community, and that might even come at loss to yourself. And at this point, we're not talking about rules for finance or business. We're talking about commandments around generosity. So when you see someone who is in great need, you need to look at them, and hopefully you've built yourself a sufficiently prosperous household that you are capable of lending money at no interest, or even lending money, like I said in Deuteronomy 15, when there is a great likelihood that you won't get it back. Um, Obviously, I'm going to say, to me, that's not guidance for how to do business. The Bible's not saying, here's a good way to do business. Lend money when you don't think you will get repaid. It's doing something else. And I would say what it's doing there is saying, take care of the people that are around you. Seek the peace of the city in which you've been planted. Um, but I'm curious, Stephen, does that sound like I'm on the right trail here?
yes. So we know for sure that it's not immoral to be involved in lending, the industry of lending with interest. We know that for sure because in our famous parable of the talents slash minas, which we love, Jesus says that the master comes back with, at the very least, you could have put your money up for collateral with the money lenders and you could have earned interest on the money. That's the least that you could have done. So Jesus would never recommend us to to engage in sin or do something that was morally deplorable. So we know that it's not. We know that it's not gross. And if you read those passages that you've mentioned, and if anybody's scoring at home, and you like to know what the Bible says about these, it's funny you referenced several of the passages that I dug up for the same thing. I think the central passages when it comes to lending are, you read Exodus 22:25, Leviticus 25:35 through 37, and Deuteronomy 23:19 through 20. Now those passages give advice that could sound in conflict. You mostly were reading things that are like, don't be lending money with interest, but you will see both in those passages. We'll see both to lend money and not to lend money. And I think it's worth saying that when God makes a law and says, don't do this thing because it's a sin for you to do it, he is almost always, I can't think of a good caveat to this or good exception. When he tells you not to do something, he is in the same breath encouraging you to do the opposite of that. So when he says, do not lie, it is the same thing as saying, tell the truth. So uh, for him to say, don't lend money at interest um, to the poor, he's clearly saying that it's okay to lend money with interest to somebody else, to somebody that's not poor. So do you want my bottom line on this subject now?
Yeah, give it to me.
Okay, well, what I think about this subject is, first of all, it's not that you lend to people and you kind of go, they might pay me back, they might not, who knows? When you lend money to somebody and you have no expectation of them returning it, that's called charity, and that's giving, and that's fine. But our attitude is not, well, they might pay it back and they might not. No. If we lend money even to someone who's poor, and this dude needs money, he just lost his job, they can't pay their bills, how are they going to do it? Well, those of us who can should lend them money. And you could even write it down on paper and get them to sign it if you want. Say, I'm lending you $10,000. I expect you to give it back to me in a year's time. Sound good to you? Okay, there you go. I'm writing it down. I'm not expecting interest on this. This isn't a business transaction. This is me supporting a family member. Okay, so that you could do that with family members. You could do that with close friends that you believe in. You know them. You try. Man, they're part of my community. They're the inner circle of my life. That's fine. So do that, but biblically, we'd never give a chunk of money to somebody thinking that it's a loan and going like, well, they might pay it back and they might not. If somebody doesn't have the integrity to pay back, they'd actually be taken in front of the council and dealt with, because you have somebody who is a dishonest person here. Now we got a whole other issue going on. So what is clear to me scripturally is that lending with interest to make money is not a problem. The problem is, why is the person coming to you? That's what I read in all of this. Why is the person coming to you? If they're coming to you because they're facing poverty, they're facing not paying bills, they're facing hunger, they're facing clothing issues. Okay, well then you lend money to them. You could give it if you want to, but you could also lend the money without interest. But even if it's a close friend that's going, I'm starting a business, I'm thinking of we're going to try to make some money here. Would you lend me money so that I could start this business? I would say, sure, I'll lend it to you at 10%. Because it's about expansion at that point. It's about investment to make money. And that's why when we see the word foreigner, that you can charge a foreigner interest, a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, it's a fact. That word that is translated foreigner could also be translated a trader or a merchant. And sometimes I've done this myself. Back when I was in my hair salon days, I went to a wealthy, believing friend and said, we want to borrow money from you. And he was like, well, what? Because this was all kind of foreign territory. And I said, now we want to pay you 12% interest a year on the money, and you'll be the first one paid. I'll show you what our schedule is for. He was like, keep talking. And he got very interested and he lent us money, and it strengthened our relationship. There was no problem. I paid it back in exactly the time I said. I showed him the math, paid him 12% interest back, better than anything he could have gotten at a bank, and all went well. No problem. That's all moral and good and fine. So I think the answer is yes about being part of the practice of either borrowing or lending money at interest. It just depends on what position the person's in. We don't want to take advantage of people who are hurting and charge them interest.
Right. I agree. I think that with debt, whether we're on the borrowing side or the lending side, the theme of the day today is going to be there are two really big ditches on both sides of the debt road.
All
And
right.
when we're in the lending position, I think that there's, I had written this down too. Jesus uses interest taking as the bare minimum for a faithful manager when it comes to the Lord's
True.
expectations. So it's hard for me to say debt is bad, lending is bad. So there's not a blanket ban against us paying or taking interest, but there's also places I don't think we're supposed to go. And we're going to talk about that both as a borrower or as a lender. So,
Great.
um, can I give some examples of what's off limits?
You may.
So I don't think we're supposed to be on either side of these deals. When we think about, there's some that maybe to me feel a little obvious. Check cashing industry, payday loans, title loans. Have you seen those businesses in the bad part of town?
I have.
Those businesses exist to crush people who are with no other options. So to me, those they our the business model is built around, we don't expect to get paid back on most of these loans, but we're going to just squeeze people so hard that we end up getting a decent rate of return, because we know when we make the loan they'll never be able to repay it, but we're going to get it back eventually in these oppressive interest rates that we're going to charge them and attach to them for a long time. You should oppose those businesses if they show up in your neighborhood or in your town and you have any ability to do so. They're very bad for people. Um, Ultra high interest credit cards. Um, this one, maybe a little bit less clear, but I don't think that we should be borrowing money on credit cards that charge 25% interest rates. There, you could argue with me about that one, that there's a time when you're running a startup and that's your only option to make computer purchases or something, you have to do it. But for the most part, I think exorbitant interest rates usually should be a flashing warning sign that we are stepping into a use of debt that is not in alignment with the biblical picture for how debt can be wisely used, either as a lender or a borrower. So I'm going to call some of those things off limits.
All right.
Mainly because they either take advantage of people who don't realize that they're enslaving themselves to the lender, or they press hard on folks who have no other options. So if we now kind of agree that we can use debt as a tool, then the question is just how do we handle it wisely?
Okay.
And I'm going to start with the idea that leverage can be very good. So what leverage is it says, if the easiest way, most common way kind of in our society to leverage yourself is if you buy a house with a mortgage. And the reason it's called leverage is I can buy a house, let's say it's $500,000, and I can save up $500,000 and I buy that house and it goes up in value by 3% every year. So I'm getting $15,000 of appreciation for my $500,000 investment every year. But what if I was to only put down a $50,000 down payment? Now I've
Oh,
invested $50,000 of my money and I'm making mortgage payments, but my equity in that house is going from, it started out at 50,000, but now it's going up by a much greater percentage of what I invested. And that's because I'm what's called leveraged in that investment. I have used debt to finance it so that I could take less cash and still acquire an asset. So that's my definition. And many businesses would not exist without leverage. Like most massive global companies have a debt leverage ratio that's much higher than you might guess, meaning they're using debt to finance operations every day. And it allows you to continue growing wealth or a business without liquidating growing assets in order to cover the cost of new acquisitions. So if you are a business and you need to buy a new machine to make your widgets, you don't now have to necessarily go out and sell assets that you've got or liquidate them to buy that machine. You can purchase the machine with debt. You've leveraged yourself a bit as a business, and it allows you to expand and make more money. So leverage can be useful. It's pretty much critical to running very large businesses. And I think for most people, like I said, the easiest way to understand this is to think about mortgage borrowing. So, Steve, you've been a mortgage lender. You've been in this world. What are your thoughts on how does the average person, when they show up and they're thinking, I'd like to buy a house, what's going through their brain as a borrower?
Well, most people are thinking,
One announcement for you all today. After some wrangling with the IRS, ever dealt with the IRS before? Fun, good times, chipper, kind of get it done kind of group of people there yet at the IRS? Yeah. Anyhow, after about 10 months of wrangling with them, Abraham's Wallet is now a, drum roll, we are a registered charity. Now, we've been a 501c3 donatable charity for a while, but now we will actually appear on the government registry. I foolishly thought that was automatic at one point. No, you have to arm wrestle people to make that happen. It has now happened. The reason I'm telling you that is because early on, we had a lot of people asking us, hey, could I nominate you guys for my company to donate to? And once they started that process, they found we didn't appear on the official registry. So this is just an announcement to let you know we do now appear on the official registry. And if your government, if your company does grants or charitable giving, we'd be more than happy to receive it. Whenever we bring up this kind of topic, I just have to say how grateful I am to our donors. There are people who give just a couple of bucks a month, and there are people who give dramatically and generously to us. And they're the ones that make this happen. So I just want to throw out a thank you to you guys, and now we'll get you back to the good stuff.
well, most people are thinking, what is the maximum amount of house that I can get? Period. And can you finance people, you people that have numbers and percentages and stuff, can you all work it so that I can pay what I think I can afford in any given month and give me the maximum amount of house for that? I don't care if you tell me the house is worth $10 million and I'm only paying you $1.50 a month, and that the hounds of winter are going to come to my front door in 18 months. I don't even care about that. Just, can I get in the door right now today? Because if I close my eyes tightly enough, I just know that future problems will go away eventually. So I've told people this story before, but I was given mortgages back in about, I don't know, 2005, somewhere around there. And we were doing quite well. The financial world was doing quite well at that time. There were non-conventional loans that were going where you could get a loan for 103 or 106% of the value of your home. And they would give you cash, give you money at the closing of the house. So how much? So you have zero equity in the house when you move in, and they gave you money to just start making the payments. And people were very happy to sign on the dotted line and get into those. And as a broker, I would just do everything. Look, I will, if you want this loan, I'm here to serve you. But I'm really recommending that you go a different way. And people go, no, that's what we want. Just shut up. Just give us. Okay. So it was a hard time to be a broker because people aren't thinking. They're not thinking.
But you were making those loans in 2005 and 2006, and it went great in 2007 and 8, right?
Yeah, it never stopped. It was perfect eternally. Everything went great.
The whole global financial system melted because of these loans that Steven Manuel was writing.
That's right.
But yeah, and that's the point I wanted you to make, really, is that, hey, everybody, we've talked about this with cars. People, if you go to a car dealership and you've got 50 grand in your pocket and you want to buy an SUV, it doesn't really matter. The salesperson's going to go, what kind of payment you looking for?
Right.
And that's how people think about stuff with debt. And that's no bueno, guys. What we want you to think about is debt is a tool, and you go, I can afford this item. And I'll figure out the optimal way to leverage debt to benefit my household. But I'm not thinking about debt as, well, let's just use it to get the thing I want, whether or not I can afford it.
Right.
It should almost have very little impact on your purchasing decisions. I will say that most people, and we're going to talk about this next, are going to use debt if they're going to buy a house in this country. So I don't have a problem with that. You don't need to have the cash for the house in your pocket when you go to get a mortgage. But you shouldn't go in with that mentality that you were just describing, which is just get me into the thing I want for the payment I can afford. Consequences, to heck with them.
Yes. And so what I hear you saying is that leveraging your financial situation, if you have acquired it, you're managing it, and you're multiplying it, learning how to leverage that is a tool that if you want to be financially mature, you need to know how to use. You don't have to be leveraged all the time. It's something that you should know how to do, and you see it as a negotiation. It's a tool that you can use or not use. You're not saying, if you've got equity in your house, you need to go out and use that equity to buy another house. You're not saying that. You're saying it's part of being financially mature, and before we become financially mature, we're going to have to learn how to use this thing.
Right. And I'll use an example that I deal with a lot as a financial planner. So people either come to me and they have no concern for levels of debt in their life, and they're like, I'll take all the debt I can get. It sounds great. I can get more stuff. Or they have grown up or acquired somewhere along the way just a revulsion to debt, and they think it's bad and I have to get it gone immediately. And a lot of times this comes up in people's thinking about how they deal with their mortgage, because a lot of people have a mortgage and they can either make the payments just over time, 30 years. Wow, if you're a person who doesn't like debt, thinking about having debt for 30 years is a daunting prospect. Or they can just aggressively attack it and say, every spare dollar I have is going to that mortgage until I get rid of it. And I do this illustration a lot, which if we just use some plug numbers and assume that somebody bought their home in 2021 when rates were super low. So I'm just assuming a 3% mortgage rate. May the Lord allow us to someday see that again. And a $500,000 mortgage, which 5 years ago, that would have been like, what are you talking about, Mark? Are they buying a house in California? But now that's kind of what people are paying for houses all over the place.
Yeah.
So if you have the option of saying, I'm person number one, I don't like debt, so I'm putting all my extra cash towards the mortgage. On that mortgage I described, the payment's about $2,100 a month. And let's assume this family's killing it. They're doing well, and they've got $4,000 a month that they have available to pay for housing and to do their investing and saving and things like that. So there's $4,000, $2,100 of it has to go to the mortgage or the house will get taken back. So there's not much decision there. But person number one says, I'm going to take that extra $1,900 a month. I'm going to pay it into the mortgage, pay down the principal fast as I can. And in a short 12 and a half months, they own their home outright, no mortgage. And it's now worth about $875,000. So it has gone up in value and they own it outright.
Wait, not 12 months.
12 years. Sorry.
There we go.
12 and a half years. About that long, 150 payments.
Okay.
12 months. That'd be cool. If you can get that deal, take it. But
yeah, do that.
Person number two says, same loan. I'll just take my 30-year loan and pay it off on schedule. And I'll take my $1,900 and instead I'll invest that money in just a diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds where I can probably reasonably expect about a 7% return. Now, after 150 payments on their mortgage, they still owe $344,000. So they've still got a relatively big mortgage. However, their house is still worth $875,000. It has appreciated, and kind of what we talked about before, they've leveraged themselves, so they didn't put as much cash. And because they've been investing $1,900 a month for the last 12 and a half years, they've now got over $450,000 in an investment account. So compared to the person who put all their money into the mortgage, This person has $100,000 extra in net worth because of what they did. But it gets even more interesting if we look at the full 30 years. So over the full 30-year period, person number one, let's say, so they pointed all their guns at the mortgage, paid it down in 12 and a half years. And for the next 17 and a half years, they have been able to invest $4,000 a month into the market. And at the end of that full 30-year period, they've got their paid off house and they've got an investment account worth $1.65 million.
Well done.
Yeah, high five. But person number two also now, because we've finished the 30-year mortgage, has a paid off house. But they've continued investing their $1,900 a month for that whole time. And at the end of their 30 years, their investment account is worth $2.3 million.
Different.
So they've made a substantial extra chunk of money. And this just illustrates that sometimes aggressively trying to get debt out of your life when it's what we would call, quote, good debt or smart debt is not the path to maximizing wealth.
It's a great point. And just to make the dumb guy observation here, you said their mortgage was at 3% and that in the market they're making 7%.
Right.
So it makes sense if you could borrow money. This is what you're effectively doing, to borrow money at 3% and go make it at 7%. You've got a profit on your hands. And that's what's happening with this person, is that they're making more money in the market than it's costing them to borrow it against that house.
Right. We call it arbitrage. So why did it work out? One, I think there was three things that worked out in this case that are worth kind of screening your ideas through these three filters before you say, okay, this is a time when I might want to use debt like this. Number one, the debt service was affordable to the borrower. So it didn't put them in a pinch. They weren't going out and saying, I have $4,000 a month available and I can get this mortgage for $4,200 a month. And I bet I could figure out a way to scrape by and pull it together. That's not what happened. There was plenty of space to make their payment. Number two, the debt was used to finance an appreciating asset. This is a big one. So if something changed in cash flows, let's say I'm got that $4,000 a month every month because I got a great job, and then we hit a huge recession and I don't have a great job anymore. Well, with an appreciating asset, when you use debt to finance it, worst case scenario, the idea is that in 10 years, it's worth more than it was when you first bought it. And you could sell that asset, pay off the debt, probably pocket some money and move on, maybe find a cheaper place to live. That's not the case if you're buying a Cadillac Escalade. That would be a depreciating asset. So side note, did you know that they're making 10-year car loans now because of how pricey cars have gotten?
I did not know that.
So you could borrow $140,000 for a premium SUV now, get a 10-year loan, and then run into hot water in 7 years, and you would not, very likely you would be underwater on that vehicle, and you would have to come up with money just to sell it.
How sad.
So that's the opposite of an appreciating asset.
Yes, indeed. Here's a recommendation for those Americans who are listening to us. Buy a car that you can afford to own. There's a good tip for everybody. If you can't afford a brand new Escalade, don't look at them. Don't shop them because you can't afford it. How do you like that?
Dude, I was talking to a guy the other day who sells Range Rovers, and he was talking to us and he said, all I have to do because my wife's a physician and we were talking about doctors that make dumb choices with car purchasing. And he said, I know they've got the income to qualify for the loan. All I have to do is get them to sit in it. And they know that it's not reliable. He's like, no mystery. It's not reliable.
True.
It's going to cost a ton of money to keep it on the road. But if I can get them to sit in it and feel the luxury and the status, they're going to buy it. And I just thought, man, that's a little bit of a sad commentary, but I bet you're telling the truth 100%.
And the guy goes, and I just use a hard liquor to get to sleep at night because I know that I'm bankrupting all of these people.
Yeah, says the man who gave people 100% of their 106% of their house price on their mortgages. Let's not be too judgy here.
I I can probably count on one hand the number of loans that I did like that, and I guarantee you every one of them came with very strong warnings. Now,
Okay.
listen, you're putting yourself in a precarious position. Oh no, we'll be fine. We know. Yeah, okay.
I'm just
Now
razzing you.
listen, Mark, you've talked to us about the benefits of leveraging. We've not gone into the warning. We've not gotten into Dave Ramsey. Is it a good time to put a pin in it and pick it up later?
Yeah, so let me kind of get through number 3. Step 1 was I could afford to service the debt. It wasn't overextending me. Step 2, it was used to purchase an appreciating asset. Little sidebar, an appreciating asset does not have to be real estate or land. It could be something like an education, but you need to think about that pretty hard. We've done episodes entirely around college savings in the past and how do you choose a college and things like that. Um, some degrees that people go into great amounts of debt for, really good investments. Others, not so good investments. So we're not going to rehash all of that today, but I do think an appreciating asset means something that's going to make you wealthier in the long run. It doesn't have to necessarily be a real asset that you can kind of hold legal title to, if that makes sense.
NFL team? That's a good appreciating asset.
How much did Mark Cuban pay for the Dallas Mavericks? It was some silly low number.
I think it was something like 200 million.
And it sounded huge at the time.
Yes, it did.
But now
it's appreciated pretty well.
You can't buy a team in the NBA in the smallest market for less than $2 billion now.
Correct.
Because I know I live in maybe the smallest NBA market and they just sold their team.
Yes.
So what's the third thing? It's the debt was borrowed at a rate, like you mentioned, Steve, lower than the rate of return that could be expected in the market.
There it is.
And if we flipped that scenario, did you know that in 1987, I think mortgage rates hit 17%?
No, I didn't know that.
Oh, okay. Well, it's true. And if we flip the scenario and said, well, I can borrow money at 8%, which isn't completely out of the pale right now, the way that interest rates have gone up recently. And I really am only comfortable investing in a way that I could reasonably expect a 6% rate of return. Well, then my advice changes and it's time to pay that debt down as aggressively as possible. Maybe you go for a 15-year loan so that you have a lower interest rate and can get back faster. So it's not a blanket admonition when you guys are out there shopping for mortgages to go get the biggest chunk of debt you can and pay the minimum. That's not the advice.
I'll just throw this out since we're talking about mortgages, and it's the most common way that people leverage, as you say. When rates dove, I don't know, it was 18 to 36 months ago, we were in a 15-year mortgage that we were paying down, and we refinanced because of it was such cheap long-term money. I hope people understand what I mean when I say that. It was cheap money that we were borrowing to pay off the house long-term. And we had a goal to pay off our house, by some age. I don't even remember what it was. And we just changed that to, well, now we just started a new 30-year mortgage. Well, when are you going to pay that off? That thing's going to be going into your 80s. Well, we want to be person 2 in the scenario that you're describing, where we have so much more money that we have produced out in the marketplace or in the stock market or wherever, that paying off our house the day that we decide to stop working for income, that's not a problem. You can do that whenever. So traditionally, people think of paying off their mortgage the very year that they stop their working career. And now those things, meet together perfectly, which is a fine plan. But it's also not dumb if you can get super cheap money and mortgage rates are really low to borrow all of that money. And the day that you stop working, you've got that surplus of money that's been made, and you can use that to pay off your house whenever you want.
Right. So that's the side of debt that it can actually be very good, and it can be a tool for a household. What about the flip side, where debt can be very bad? And there's a bunch of ways that you probably can think of how this happens. I think one of the most common ones that I see as a financial planner is that credit cards tend to bite people in the behind. So,
of course.
Can I read you a story I wrote?
Yes.
Okay.
Tell me a story.
Once upon a time, there was a man named Sam, and Sam loved to shop. He would use his credit card to buy things he didn't really need, and he was just thinking, hey, I can pay this off later, no problem. And at first, Sam was able to make the minimum payments on a credit card balance every month, but he was actually only paying the interest charges, and little known to Sam, he wasn't making a dent in the principal. And after a few months, yes, just a few short months, Sam's credit card balance had grown to $5,000 with an interest rate of 18%. His minimum payment, though, was still only $125, which seemed totally manageable, so he carried on using the card. As time went on, Sam's debt began to snowball, and he continued to make just the minimum payments, and the balance grew and grew. And after a year, the balance was over $10,000 with $1,800 in interest charges added on. His minimum payment now had started to increase to $250, which was getting harder and harder to make each month. And Sam realized that he was in way over his head, but he didn't know how to get out of debt. So he tried to cut back on spending, but it wasn't enough to make a big difference in the balance. And eventually, the debt became so big that he couldn't afford to make even the minimum payments. And he started missing payments, incurring late fees and penalties, and that just makes the debt grow faster. And at this point, to quote the scriptures, Sam had officially become slave to the lender.
Yeah.
And this is how it happens, is people start out honestly buying takeout on their credit card, and just it's a few bucks a month over what I actually make, and I'm going to use the credit card to float me. But the root of this is just like the person who takes the 106% mortgage or who buys the car they can't afford. It's, I want things that I cannot afford. And unfortunately, the culture we live in has given us a tool that makes it very easy to go grab those things.
Yes.
And it enslaves you. The financial system will take your ability to transact away from you, which makes it very hard to operate in our society if you have to declare bankruptcy and lose everything that they can take back and lose your ability to use this tool of debt in the future. I do have a Twitter account that I want to plug. I know that you and I, we like the Twitter because we're men of a certain age.
Yeah.
A lot of our listeners, they don't know what Twitter is. They probably never heard of it, but it's like TikTok, but instead of videos, people write words at each other. And there's an account. The tag is at Guy Dealership, and he's a car dealership owner. He owns actually quite a few car dealerships. And I love the account because he's got really good insights into the car market, and he's telling all the time horror stories of the deals people get themselves into, especially in the past couple years as cars have been nuts. This is another area where I just see people torch themselves with bad debt decisions, is the area of vehicles. And that used to be a less big deal, I would say, until the pandemic era, in which car prices just went nuts and started doing weird things. So $1,500 monthly car payments have become absolutely common now, which
shocking.
That was like, oh, you have a Ferrari back in the day, and now it's just kind of normal. I think it is interesting. I saw some data the other day that said Gen Z, which would be the younger than millennials. Shout out to all of our Gen Z listeners. They are the most likely by far of any generation currently alive to buy a luxury vehicle, which is kind of crazy. A luxury vehicle used to be like, oh, that old retired guy bought a luxury vehicle because he's got a bunch of money. Now it's the people who have been scrolling the Instagram, and they say, I would like to have that, and I live in a culture that will let me make that bad decision.
Yeah, that's called materialism. And we've got a couple of great blog posts on the dangers of materialism, and that is the lust of the eyes. You see something and go, I want that. And again, I'm going to put off what that might mean to my life. I'll just put that out of mind because I just want the thing that looks good to me. It's very dangerous, and it's not only financially hazardous, it is spiritually hazardous.
Right. And if you would just run your I'm thinking about using debt question through the matrix we described earlier, you'd probably get stopped from making a bad choice when it comes to cars, for example, because a
Right.
car is a depreciating asset.
Right.
Kind of interestingly, you used to could avoid most of the really bad traps around cars and debt by just going and buying a used car. I
Right.
remember my dad drilled it into my head. The second you drive the car off the lot, it loses 10% of its value, right? But
I always heard a third.
that's not true anymore. Used
Yeah.
cars currently cost more than new cars, which is
Yeah.
because there's a supply chain issue and you got to wait 9 months if you want a new car. So people are getting more for a slightly used car than a new car. So you can go buy a used car and then be underwater because you're not a dealer and you've got issues. And if you try to sell it, the dealer's not going to give you what you paid for it. So I think that a depreciating asset, like we said, it's not as bad as no asset. It's not as bad as Chinese takeout that you ran up on your credit card. There's still something there for at least a while. But if you use that kind of matrix, I really do think it's a great way to avoid most, if not all, of the major pitfalls of debt. So, any thoughts on the slavery-inducing nature of debt in our culture?
No, I think we've covered it pretty well. I just want you to repeat the name of the Twitter handle.
The Twitter handle is Guy Dealership. He's the car dealership guy, and he just launched a podcast if you want to hear it. His episodes are like 9 or 10 minutes long.
I like that.
And I'm not in the market for a car, and I still find it super fascinating. And I guarantee you, if you listen to what that guy says, somebody in your life is going to be like, I need a car. And you're going to go, let me tell you what. I'd say his number one takeaway right now is if you just need a car and you got to get a deal, you should be looking at a Buick, my friend, because they are giving them away right now.
Okay, good to know. I would like to throw out we're about to close. I'd like to throw out a Twitter follow that I've been impressed by lately, and I think people would enjoy. We're about multi-generational wealth building. We think that if you're faithful now, that your grandchildren will be well quilted in 5 capitals.
Yes.
So there's a great follow that is, I don't know if this guy's a believer. He doesn't use the word multi-generational the way that we would, but it's called Secrets of Old Money. And it's a great follow. And the stuff that he's talking about is building multi-generational families. And he talks about wealth in that vein. Secrets of Old Money on Twitter.
Yeah, that's great. I've noticed you kind of commenting and posting stuff he's put up. So,
Yes, indeed.
Worth your time. And since you're on Twitter, you're taking our advice, you're looking at it. Go ahead and give the old Abraham's Wallet tag a follow. Why not?
Yeah, right. Why not?
All right. Well, we got halfway through our notes, and we've exhausted the attention span, I think, of our audience. They've finished their run and they've stretched. So,
yep, it's time for the protein shake. Go get it.
We're gonna let them go. They wouldn't be able to hear us over the blender, anyways. Next week we'll come back with part 2, or whenever we air it. We'll come back with part 2. Which is the opposite side of this. If we learned how to deal with being a borrower in a wise way, how do we deal with being a lender in a wise way, and in a way that lines up with the biblical commands? And then at the end of that, we're going to give you, if you're hearing this and you're going, I I've completely screwed up here. We're going to give you some practical steps to take regardless of where you're at in this debt journey.
To come back.
Yeah, I would say no matter where you're at, take heart. We don't think that it's hopeless for you, and we're going to hopefully give you some action items next time.
Just one last word from me, everyone. I know that we're talking about debt and leverage as if maybe you're getting ready to buy your third apartment building. And so leverage is this, high-minded, big finance idea. But I know that statistically, most of the people listening deal with debt, maybe not in an unhealthy way, but one that causes you stress and produces anxiety for you. I just want to say we empathize with that. I totally understand that feeling. Both Mark and I had to deal with paying off debt early on in our marriages. And I know that it can really gum up your ability to dream multi-generationally about what kind of legacy you're going to leave and 5 capitals blessings that you're going to leave to your children's children, etc. Totally understand that. And I just want to encourage you to be faithful and to move forward with hope. Faith is believing that which you cannot yet see. And I just want to encourage you to walk in that way, knowing that ultimately the work that you put in now, the choosing against yourself for the long term, it's going to pay off. And if you want another shot in the arm to encourage you in that way, I would send you over to abrahamswallet.com to read an old article of ours called Killing $180,000 of Debt in Under 4 Years.